Well, here's an ethical question for you. If you had the option, would you choose the gender of your baby? Our next two guests plan to do exactly that.
The UK's first ever gay parents now have 5 children. However, 4 of them are boys, and they now plan to have a 6th child and want to make sure it's a girl.
Gender selection is illegal in the UK and here in Australia, so Barrie and Tony and more Australians are going to America to choose the sex of their baby. Barrie and Tony join us now from San Francisco. Morning to you. And author and commentator Dr. Leslie Canold is in Melbourne today. Thank you, everyone. Barrie and Tony, let's start with you. Why are you so keen to have a girl?
Well, we as you just said on your VT there, we have 4 boys and 1 girl at the moment, and we trying to balance our family in that we believe that gender selection in terms of family balancing is quite an appropriate thing to do, and we don't see the downside to doing that. What we want to do is have more children, but if science lets us select whether we can have a male or a female, then we want at least another girl, just to balance our family out, really.
I mean, families have had this dilemma for, you know, since families have been around, which is about 600,000 years, I think. You know, most people who end up with a family that is unbalanced in the sense that, you know, they have 4, 5 boys, usually tell you, well, you know, in the end, it didn't matter. Does it matter to you that much, Tony and Barrie?
You know, if we had another 3 children and they were all boys, we'd love them all the same, because your love's unconditional for any child that you have. But if science provides you with the option to be able to select that gender, and you already have 4 boys and 1 girl, well, another girl would actually be quite nice. And I see that as more as rounding our family somewhat, just having that more female influence. So.
Yeah, sure.
And we're having to use techniques that are not normally available to most people anyway. You know, we're doing an IVF procedure. The extra service, if you like, is there to have a girl. So we are determined that this time we will have a girl.
And you mentioned that it's us doing that, but it's not only us doing that. You know that Barrie and I run the British Surrogacy Centre in the UK, and we're helping. We've got 7 Australian couples at the moment that we're helping through a surrogacy process, and 2 of those are looking at gender selection.
3, actually.
Or 3 of those, yeah. Sorry, 3 of those are looking at gender selection. And we're here, as you know, in San Francisco at the moment. We're in California, and in the state of California in the US. People would look at you today, and doctors and psychologists, and say, what's the issue? Because it's just a given that if you can scientifically select the gender of your child, what's wrong with that?
Sure.
So.
Well, let's bring in Dr. Canold on that one.
Yeah. Let's talk to Dr. Canold. Look, if as the men say, if the science is there and people want to do gender selection, why shouldn't they be able to?
Well, look, my view about it is, and I go back with reproductive technology quite a long way. So when it all first started, you know, rightly, the aim wasn't to provide people with kind of a consumer sort of choice about, you know, I prefer pink rather than blue. It's quite a serious technology. It was designed to help people who couldn't have children at all, you know, blue, pink, tan, orange. They just wanted a child, and a healthy child. And so the technologies came about to help people who were infertile have children, and to help people who had, you know, terrible diseases like haemophilia or cystic fibrosis in their family line to get those things out so that they didn't have a child or another child with a terrible disability. And of course, you've just run a segment about disability and how difficult it is to raise children in that way. So I suppose my concern about it is, you know, just because you can choose something doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing to do. And it seems to me that because we're still in a situation where lots of people don't have access to this technology, so I completely support people who are gay or who are single to have access to this technology. We're still not there. We still don't have access for everybody who can't afford it. So these are parents, you know, Barrie and Tony can afford it, but not everybody can. I think, you know, it would be positive if we could work towards that sort of situation where everybody can get access to it who needs it, rather than focusing on what I think are kind of trivial, you know, like I said, kind of consumerist sort of trivial reasons to
if we move beyond, you know, what you think of as the trivial consumerist reasons for it, and move beyond the immediate family unit, what do you see, Dr. Canold, as some of the wider implications if this were allowed and available to all?
Well, there's a couple of things that people can worry about, and they're factual questions. So in some countries, for instance, we know that there's a huge preference for boys. So for instance, China and India, most people would be aware that these technologies, but more commonly termination, is being used to try to ensure that boy children are born. And so you have an imbalance in terms of gender that results from that. Now, we're not sure that would happen in countries like Britain or Australia because it's not allowed. We simply don't have the data. It may be that would be one of the consequences, and that would be a really negative consequence. But I know that one of the consequences I'm worried about is that we would lose support. I think people forget it really wasn't that long ago that there was no support for people to get access to this technology, full stop. The church opposed it, conservative politicians opposed it, even for, you know, married couples. Then it was very slowly allowed for couples who weren't married, and we're still fighting, as I say, to make sure people who all have access to it, regardless of their gender preference and their marital status. So I just think, you know, we think all of this is bedded down, it can't be taken away. That's absolutely not true, and I think we should focus on the things that really matter.
All right. Now, listen, I'm sorry we're going to have to leave it there, everyone. We've just run out of time on this segment. But, listen, thanks very much for your input there. It's a really interesting debate, and hopefully we'll get to chat about this in future again, because I'm sure our viewers are going to want to hear more. So thanks, Tony and Barrie, and thank you, Dr. Leslie Canolt.
Thank you.
It's also raised, I think, a really interesting question about, you know, what we are as humans. We think we can control everything, but there are certain things we can't, such as the weather or the gender of our child, and I think that's...
Yeah, but when we can, like they are in the States at the moment, how many problems have they had with that system now? It's already up and running.
Well, I think that's what I'm saying. I think it changes who we are when we can control everything.
But then, you know, medicine is improving every year, and we're doing things that we didn't think we could do. So where do you stop? Where do you start?